for Coming by Pure Foy's Girl. Chapter 30. Will drew Hannibal to his bed in silence, a quietly determined shadow, backlit by a single bedside lamp he'd left burning. Hannibal stayed when Will let him go, watching him move to turn the covers back. He was always so effortlessly beautiful, a masterpiece of symmetry, grace, and goodness. There was no art in the world that could compare to him in Hannibal's eyes, no fortune that could come to a man which would be greater than the steady gaze of his blue eyes from beneath thick black lashes, and that small smile that curved his full mouth. And the heart that had suffered so much hardship, but still had the bravery to try and try again, despite the blows it had been dealt. That was a precious gift, which Hannibal was not about to squander. Will turned out the light and slid into his bed, listening to Hannibal shed the pants he still wore, and to the soft tread of his bare feet on the rug as he came to the bed. He closed his eyes when the mattress sank, every sense keyed to his husband's presence, his warm earthy aroma and his heat, the faint glide of blankets over his skin as he slipped into the bed next to Will. It was the first touch, however, that made Will's heart leap up in his chest. Hannibal's long, sensitive fingers found his side beneath the blankets, tracing the curve of his hip through his nightshirt. The brush of his touch pulsed through Will's body and coiled in his groin, heavy and immediate. Passions left slumberous for so long that Will had once doubted they could ever be roused woke yet again, as Hannibal's hand slid up his belly, strong arm folding over Will's side, muscular body coming to rest against his back. The air was thick with Hannibal's alpha scent, heavy with the musky flavor of desire. Will pulled it into his lungs as far as he could, another frisson of excitement running through him when his round backside was snugly and firmly tucked into the cup of Hannibal's groin. Hannibal nuzzled his curls and squeezed him close, curling around him with the purring satisfaction of a great, sleek cat. Will slid his hand back, cupping his palm over Hannibal's hip, the flex and shift of muscle beneath his touch speaking to the effect he had on his husband. He wondered if such would happen anywhere he touched Hannibal, but pushed the thought away to simply tug on him, urging him closer, wanting the comforting press of being so fully engulfed in his strength. Hannibal closed his eyes and drew in Will's scent, recognizing by instinct the smoky edge that it held. He shifted and ducked his head, testing the soft place behind Will's perfect ear, down the curve of his jaw to his throat, neck so graceful and perfect it would put swans to shame. He didn't mean to follow the trail with kisses, but somehow he found himself doing so, kissing each place he scented as he went. Will tipped his head up, turning in Hannibal's arms to roll onto his back, a soft sound of contentment escaping him when Hannibal rolled against him, half pinning him in his eager exploration. He could feel the thrilling, weighty bulk of his husband between his thighs, roused with appreciation, but there was no expectation in it, only honest and natural responsiveness as great as Will's own. Hannibal drew back enough to stroke Will's cheek, sheer alpha pleasure filling him when his sturdy little mate caught his wrist and held it, scenting him, leaving a gentle bite that was more a rub of his Omegan fangs than anything. When he lowered his head, Will found his throat and did the same, holding Hannibal still to taste him. They twined together on his bed, learning one another in a way that no words could offer. Scent, taste, touch, the texture of one another's skin, the places where the perfume of their bodies lay strongest. It was a pleasure all its own, this exploration, latent impulses awakening in response to touch and scent. There was no part of Will's throat, collarbone, jaw, wrists, hands that was left untouched, nor any part of Hannibal's in return. Under the heavy blankets, in the muffled darkness, they drew each other in, sensitive and awed, tender and gentle, with the promise of what might be. Time seemed to cease, the world shrinking down to include just the two of them, kiss-damp and languorous in their mutual adoration. Eventually, Will succumbed to his exhaustion, succumbed to the comfort of being thoroughly marked and marking in return, with his husband's warm mouth and heavy fangs gently raking his jaw. Will's last thought before relentless sleep finally overtook him was that he could have this for the rest of his life. and all he had to say was yes. The terror that Will had felt in the mire of his doubt and distrust after his fall seemed a lifetime ago when he woke in his husband's arms, curled securely in the curve of Hannibal's body. He shifted, yawning a little and stretching his legs toward the foot of the bed before tucking back up, reluctant to emerge from this warm cocoon into the cold world. The skin of his throat felt chafed and sore, but the sensation brought a smile to his lips, calling to mind his husband purring against him and sucking on his throat, as if he could not resist the urge to draw Will's skin between his teeth. It left him pleasantly appreciative, much as they'd both been last night. Will wasn't entirely sure, given his profound response just to Hannibal's alpha marking, if he would be safe even should he decide to remove Hannibal from his life. There would still need to be a child for the Lecter line, and that would require they come together once at minimum. Perhaps he might find it too much for his bond in the end, and burn himself up in the heat of his husband's passion. Hannibal shifted behind him and settled against his back. He woke slowly, some parts of him more quickly than others, Will realized, firm as his backside was against his husband. Hannibal pressed tighter to him, in his half-sleep, and burrowed his nose into Will's fragrant curls, his arms coiling up beneath Will's to press against his chest. "Hannibal," Will whispered, as if afraid to wake him. "You should go before Jimmy comes." Hannibal squeezed him close, the sharp throb of desire banking down to softer pleasures, like the tickle of Will's curls, the easy sound of his breathing, the minute movements of his body, as he wriggled so delightfully. "Remind me," he whispered, waking to blissful relaxation from snuggling so close to his mate, "to buy you more gifts." Will uttered a soft, raspy laugh, asking, "And tell me why I should?" "So you can come to scold me," Hannibal said, chuckling when Will did, the vibration of their shared laughter rumbling through them both. "And I can seduce you into bringing me to your bed." "You think you seduced me?" Will asked, snorting a little, and burrowing back against his husband, the hand tucked against his chest cupping him, fingers tracing idle, distracting circles. "I do. You were overcome by my masculine charms." Will's laughter was throaty and deep as he rolled in Hannibal's embrace, onto his back to face his pleased, grinning husband. "Your masculine charms?" he repeated, not entirely able to ignore the way Hannibal's hand drifted down to rest on his belly, large and strong and dangerous. "I would not say that you've seduced me quite yet, Hannibal." Will's heart skipped a beat at the purring promise in his husband's words when Hannibal asked, "Is that a challenge?" "Do you think you would win if it were?" Will asked, wetting his lips. He pushed up on his elbow and loomed over Hannibal in the strong morning light, the heat of his breath stirring against Hannibal's lips. "I think I would happily die trying," Hannibal whispered, letting Will's weight push him onto his back. "Or being strangled by your marvelous thighs." "One of these days you'll know just how marvelous my thighs really are," Will told him, a hint of laughter in his soft voice, the thighs in question sliding against Hannibal's, legs tangled beneath the sheets and blankets. A deep, satisfied moan escaped him when Will pushed closer and kissed him, tongue plunging between his lips in a sultry parody of what might some day be. His satisfaction turned to amusement when Will broke the kiss to breathe. "But not today." "Ah," Hannibal sighed, wrapping his arms around Will's lithe form to keep him close, pleased when Will settled onto him. "And just when we were both feeling so appreciative." He chuckled and Will laughed, both of them relaxing into their bed with each other. Their contentment was interrupted by Jimmy, who let himself in as he always did, fully absorbed in his duties and without knocking. "Good morning, my lord. Cook wanted to know if you'd like a tray or a formal breakfast, and I thought I'd warn you that Francis is already up skulking, and if you're—" "Oh, dear!" Jimmy cut off, realizing there was more than one Lord Clarges in Will's bed. He held his hands up in a staying gesture and said, "I'll come back later."
"No, Jimmy,"
Hannibal said, sliding gracefully out of the bed since Will had vanished beneath the covers already to hide the state he was in. Not that he himself was in any less of a state, but he didn't concern himself with it.
"Take good care of him for me."
"I always do, my lord," Jimmy said, round, wide eyes tracking him as Hannibal led himself through the washroom into his own suite. The moment the door closed behind him, Jimmy vigorously fanned himself and breathed. "God's bless and have mercy on my soul, I was not prepared to see that." Will peeked out from under the covers, and Jimmy caught him, his shock turning to a delighted, odd smile. "You," he said, wagging a finger in Will's direction, "should be one happy Omega, my lord. Oh, heavens, I was not prepared. Shame on me!" Will dissolved into laughter, half embarrassed but thoroughly amused. It was a light-hearted way to begin his morning, laughing and listening to Jimmy chatter as he got Will prepared for the day. Jimmy, a professional no matter his informality, very tellingly said nothing about the marks on Will's skin, until he was dressing and it came time to put Will's neckerchief on, prompting him to suggest, "How about we make this a bit looser, for now?" "Yes, Jimmy, I think that would be for the best," Will agreed, wincing a bit when he brushed his fingers over his long throat, where the marks were heaviest and most visible. Jimmy put the piece of cloth down and fetched the arnica cream used for Will's bruises. "You know," he said, smoothing the balm gently over the suck marks on Will's neck, "I think this is the happiest I've ever seen you." Will smiled, a soft huff of laughter escaping him. "I mean it," Jimmy insisted, making sure it was rubbed in well before he began to loop Will's neckerchief on. "I know you two had a rough beginning and that things have been less than ideal to now, but if he can make you this happy, imagine how things could be from now on." Will flushed some, a light blush of color in his cheeks. "I fear that it's simply the newness of the situation, Jimmy. Given time, I question my own confidence that things could remain this way between us." "You worry you'll lose interest in one another," Jimmy clarified, frowning a bit when Will nodded. "Well, only time can tell, but if you don't give it a chance, how can you ever say for certain, my lord?" Will said nothing, only cast his eyes down in thought, his own sentiments echoing what Jimmy had said. It would be easy to retreat, to go back to the familiar solitude that had defined his life as long as he could recall. There was a kind of cold comfort to be had in that, given that he could predict how it would feel. Sad, lonely, empty, of anything but the frantic desire to be useful. But it was a state of being he was well acquainted with. The other option was rife with uncertainty, with so many paths that would lead him over the cliff's edge at last, dashing his heart against the rocks that lay below. There was no way to predict what would happen. There was no certainty. There was just the hope for happiness, and the bitter terror that it would be taken yet again, as even a hint of it always had been.
Had I any notion that such a power existed, I would thumb my nose at it. I would chase love to the ends of the earth, drown myself in happiness, and dare it to attempt to strip it from me.
He recalled how his husband had looked as he'd said it, resting on the oars of the boat in the middle of Fernhill's Lake. He seemed so confident, so unafraid, so very certain that he could wrest what he wanted from the careless jaws of fate without fear of the consequences. Some things, Will knew, were simply worth the cost of trying, no matter if one failed in the end.
"Now, which of these gorgeous watches would you like to wear today?"
Jimmy asked, jolting Will from his thoughts. He glanced up to find his valet peering into the box, a charmed smile on his lips.
"So many,"
Jimmy sighed, running his fingers over them without touching. He looked back at Will and asked,
"He sent you all of these?"
"He told me to choose some. Or all of them."
"All," Jimmy said, nodding. "You should keep them all, my lord. They are unique, and a gift should never be refused."
"I don't know, Jimmy. It seems obscene to keep them," Will said, coming closer to look down into the box. They sparkled in the light, each one so beautiful there was no choosing between them. "My lord," Jimmy said, his serious tone getting Will's attention, "how many watches are here, do you think? Perhaps one for each birthday missed? One for each anniversary?" Will frowned, studying the watches with more attention. "Do you think, had he stayed from the start, that you would have received only a watch for those times?" Jimmy pointed out, and lifted out one of the watches in question, a silver one whose face was inlaid with crystals, and a blue gem that reflected the changing color of Will's eyes back at him. "I think this one for today, don't you?" He thought of Hannibal kissing his hand each time he wanted to call Will beautiful, of him saying,
"When you've already given me everything I need."
"Yes, Jimmy." Will said, turning to let his valet clip the watch to his watch chain. He didn't feel the least bit hesitant or unhappy when he added, "And please, pack them all with my things for our return to Marsham Heath." They took a late breakfast while their trunks were packed, though a portion of their wardrobes would remain at Chelsea House for the sake of convenience. Will's new luggage was shown off by Jimmy, who had chosen it with care and preened with pride when Will complimented it. "Francis," Will said, drawing on his gloves in the foyer as Hannibal donned his coat and spoke in low tones with Mr. Black, "you will go ahead with Jimmy and Berger." "My lord, I—" Will's mouth pursed in disapproval, and he looked up at Francis from beneath dark lashes, brows drawing down. It brought the Alpha to silence, instantly contrite. "I need not remind you are not in my good graces right now, given that you vanished without a word and frightened the household on your return. You have not shown yourself in the best of lights, Mr. Dollaride." An expression of such shame and regret overtook Francis that Will paused, his gift vividly reminding him that Francis was just as irreparably damaged as he was, and in that, at least, there was kinship. "Francis, I do appreciate your dedication as well as your kindness, and I will always be grateful for what you have done to protect me. I assure you I am safe in my husband's care. Please go safely to Marsham Heath, and avail yourself to Mr. Thatcher in whatever help he needs. We shall be along shortly." Francis ducked his head and nodded, whispering in that soft, diffident way of his, "Yes, my lord." Will watched him go, somewhat ashamed by the relief he felt to have the big Alpha away from him. "He took that surprisingly well," Hannibal remarked, taking his walking cane from Mr. Black with a small smile of satisfaction. "As well he should," Will said, accepting his own hat from Mr. Black, both of them properly dressed to emerge outside into the beautiful day, though it always seemed a bit overcast once the factories were hard at work. "I will be glad when we can return him to my sister, though she seems to have little regard for him." "He has no reason to stay with her if she abuses him," Hannibal said, allowing Will to go outside ahead of him. "He has some experience in a noble house by now. He could find a position elsewhere." "She would never write him a reference," Will said, finding the ducal coach waiting for them at the curb. "Especially if she's in the wrong. My sister despises being made to feel guilty about anything." "I will not offer my ungracious opinion on that, Will, but I would write Francis a reference myself, if it would get rid of him," Hannibal said, blunt in his dislike of the other Alpha, though Will was more inclined to see his side of it now. "I'll bear that in mind," Will said, admiring the figure his husband cut with his smart hat and fashionable walking stick, his coat tailored to exquisite perfection to best show off his broad shoulders and athletic grace. "Shall we walk to the Row and have the coach meet us? I don't fancy riding such a short distance, and we'll be in it soon enough." "An excellent plan," Hannibal said, relaying such to the coachman. They moved toward the Row at an unhurried pace, arm in arm. "I do hope Francis will behave himself now that he knows you won't stand for it." "I was very firm with him," Will said, watching the ducal coach rumble past on its way to the Row to wait for them. "It seems to be the only type of handling Alphas are willing to heed." "I happen to enjoy your softness myself," Hannibal said, in a thoroughly good humor after such a restful night's sleep. No nightmares, no memories come to plague him, and every sense the gods had gifted had filled him to the brim with his beautiful mate. He angled a look at Will and purred. "Although when you're feeling appreciative, firmness is certainly—" "Hannibal!" Hannibal grinned, entirely unrepentant as he escorted Will toward the shops. "Ah, but there is so much to be done at Marsham. I doubt I can seduce you or even be threatened by your thighs, let alone by your garters, busy as you'll be." His mate grinned, amused despite himself, though he rolled his blue eyes heavenwards as if the gods could grant him more patience than he already had. "I do find the capital to be diverting," Will said, smiling when Hannibal held the door to the milliner's open for him. Yet he couldn't fuss about it. Hannibal took such delight in doting on him that it seemed churlish to refuse even the smallest of his gestures. "But I admit I am eager to return to Marsham Heath." "To the loving adoration of Miss Hobbs," Hannibal teased, taking a short jab to his rib-cage for his pertness. "You'll have a fervent admirer for the remainder of our time in Marsham, I fear." "Only while we're at Marsham?" Will asked, leading the way inside. "Do you plan on escaping my hook, Lord Clarges?"
Not if I can help it, Hannibal promised, and happily followed in his wake. It didn't take Will a terribly long time to choose a hat that would suit Abigail, considering her tastes, like his own, were hindered by her upbringing. But it was beautiful, and the box it was put in was just as lovely, and no doubt would make a gift all on its own to a young girl who longed for something different than what she had always known. Hannibal, who had amused himself by bantering with other shoppers, made his polite excuses and took Will's arm to lead him out onto the walk, saying, "One of the ladies mentioned there is a street sale going on down at the East End." "A street sale? What's that?" Will asked, allowing Hannibal to take the hat box from him as they strolled toward the coach. "Merchants set up temporary stalls," Hannibal told him, returning nods and smiles as they were sent his way from passers-by. "They sell all sorts of things, jewelry, clothing, foods. I wouldn't recommend any of it for surety, but it can be quite exciting to see. Should you like to walk down that way? It's a rather unsavory side of town, but we have the coachman park nearby and go on from there if it's too offensive."
"Yes, I would like to see that. I'm curious about the East End. Jimmy mentioned that there's a city within a city there. Have you been?"
"Not to that part particularly," Hannibal said, handing the package off to the footman, who stowed it inside on the seat. He murmured to him where to go and turned back to Will, an edge of discomfort to his voice when he said, "I found I avoided it. Too much of what was there reminded me of Lady Murasaki." Will searched his face, weighing his options, but only smiled in the end and said, "I understand. Shall we?" It was a pleasant walk, though the state of the city around them seemed to degenerate as they moved further east. Will tried his best not to look too closely at the growing unpleasantness of those around him, for fear his gift would render him a slave to their plight. Even without his gift, it was difficult to pass by people in need, and Will resolved to devote more of his time to helping where he could, when he could. It seemed incomprehensible to him that the position of one's birth should so profoundly affect their circumstances to such a vicious extent, his remark to that end provoking a rather interesting conversation between them. Their arrival to the street sale, however, gave them something more pleasant to focus on, and the colorful, chaotic noise put a thrilled, shocked grin on Will's face. "What do you think?" Hannibal asked, finding Will's excitement infectious, as always. "Should we go have a look?" Will was delighted by that suggestion, and they plunged right in. It was chaos and stench and milling excitement, the clamor of hundreds all trying to be heard, bickering over prices and wares and hawking their items in impressive attempts to gain attention. Will took it all in with an overwhelmed awe, unable to believe that so many things could be in a single place on offer for purchase. "You look like a fashionable fellow, my good sir. How about this fine silk scarf all the way from the Jade Island, my dear customer? Priceless silk. I just so happened—" Will was unceremoniously tugged away by his husband, but quickly forgot his ire as they walked through the throngs of people, stopping to watch an impromptu magic show, investigate some frankly questionable jewelry, and listen to some fairly entertaining stories from a man who seemed convinced that fairies were among them and causing illness. There were squawking chickens in crates, smoked meats, drinks doled out from the same tin ladle to each purchaser, snake oil medicines, gaudy jewelries. Nothing was sacred, and everything was for sale, no matter what it was. "I never dreamed anything like this could exist," Will said, turning his easy smile on Hannibal, who was so close to his side that no one dared push between them, even on that busy sidewalk. "It's so easy just to vanish into the crowd, isn't it? No titles, no genders, just people going about their business." "Is that something you would like, Will? To vanish into a crowd?" "Yes, somewhat," he said, uttering a short, uncomfortable laugh. He paused at a cart selling bundles of feathers, some natural, others dyed. "It's interesting to be a part of something, to feel normal." "You are a part of something," Hannibal said, settling his hand at the base of Will's back, right where the sway of his spine dipped into the high curve of his backside. There was warmth and affection in his eyes, and in his voice when he added, "You are part of our family." Will's eyes flew up to meet his, a smile on his lips. "I said it before, and I will say it again, as many times as it takes until you know it is true," Hannibal said, leaning close to be heard over the din. "You belong with me, Will, and you will always be a lector, whatever you decide." Will averted his face, thoughts moiling. He reached out to touch the feathers, as an excuse to move his attention, wishing that Hannibal hadn't such a knack for slicing through his defenses with the keen quickness of a scalpel to strengthen the attachment of his bond. "These are beautiful," he said, noticing several natural feathers in the bunches, their enhancements only nature's design. His voice was only a little tremulous, but Hannibal noticed it all the same, and rubbed his back to soothe him. "Would you like them, Will?" he asked, gesturing to the elderly woman keeping the cart. "Do you want me to scold you for it?" Will quipped, grasping for levity as a way to retreat from the frightening comfort his husband offered. "Only if I can seduce you after," Hannibal shot back, amused and relieved that Will was not upset. "Truly, though, would you like them? Perhaps for your lures?" "How do you know about my lures?" "Hawks mentioned you had a hobby," Hannibal said, wondering if Mr. Hawks had framed the lures and placed them just as he'd asked. He had certainly hoped so. He could just imagine the coshing that awaited him when Will saw his hard work out for everyone to admire. "And you are nothing if not curious." "It must seem a trivial pastime." "I find it intriguing, as a matter of fact. It takes skill to make something utilitarian as well as beautiful." Will wasn't quite sure what to say to that. He settled for nodding. "Then, yes, thank you. I would like them. For my lures." "Perhaps you can teach me how to make them some day?" Hannibal asked, hoping Will would say yes. "It would bore you." "That could never happen, Will," Hannibal said, diverting his attention to the proprietress making a bundle of the undyed feathers. He looked away from Will for a moment, only dimly aware of a squabble happening behind them. It drew Will's attention, however, along with the sudden clamor of neighing horses, shouting people, and the unmistakable cry of an animal in pain. Startled and frightened, Will looked closer in time to see a dog dart from beneath trampling feet, trailing the broken ends of a rope. "Good gods, what on earth—" The dog bumped into a woman and bounded into the crossing street, causing a pair of carriage horses to shy and thrash, nearly braining it. "Gods!" Will gasped again, instinctively going after it, frightened the poor animal had been hurt. "Will!" Hannibal called, unable to do more than watch him thread his way across the busy street, stuck as he was for the moment. Growling with worry, he fished out some coins for the vendor, snatched the little bundle from her hand, and followed after his mate with apprehension hastening his stride. The dog ran at full speed down the alleys and through narrow streets with Will in close pursuit. He had no thought to being alone in a strange part of the city, no thought to how he would find his way back. He wasn't even sure why he persisted, except that it might have been hurt somehow and might need help, though the speed with which it fled said otherwise. He took no heed of his surroundings, or the dangerous looks he was given as a finely dressed gentleman where he clearly didn't belong. He bounded under laundry lines, over people in the alley, past screaming babies and their startled mothers, oblivious to anything other than the dog. He most certainly did not notice that another man had chased after him, with a greater lead than Hannibal, and as much determination. The dog ran to ground in a narrow, empty alleyway, shooting in between a pile of crates to cower against the wall, well and truly terrified of the commotion it had caused, as well as the man pursuing it. Will came to a scrambling stop, panting with effort, and dropped into a crouch to peer into the darkness. The faintest gleam of amber eyes flashed, accompanied by an uncertain whine. "There you are," Will breathed, wishing he had something to entice it out. The trailing end of a rope lay next to his boot, and he was careful not to touch it, unsure of how it was fastened to the dog's neck. "Did that frighten you? Let's have a look at you and see if you're—" A hand on his shoulder made him spin around, surging to his feet to find a grinning, anxious blond man before him. He heard Hannibal shouting for him, racing through the maze of alleyways after losing sight of him, the alpha roar in his voice emerging with panic. "Did that frighten you?" the man asked, sending his words back at him with a mocking smile. "Let's have a look at you." "Who are you? What do you want?" Will asked, concerned by his manic smile, but unwilling to show it. His heel hit the crates as he moved and shifted them, a few loose pieces falling against the wall behind him. "You're Lord Clarges, aren't you?" the man asked, adjusting his wire-framed spectacles, his hand skating up through his hair so that it stood on end, which in no way helped his agitated appearance. "May I ask who's asking? Or are we to play a guessing game?" "Could you come with me, please?" he asked instead, and a shift of his hand showed Will the flash of a pistol in his jacket pocket. Will's brows slammed together with annoyance, and he said, "I'm not going anywhere with you." The young man laughed, a breathless and unsettling sound, and said, "No, see, you are going to come with me, or I'm just going to shoot your husband. I can hear him, can't you? Any minute now he'll be here. You'd better do a good job of it. If you only manage to hurt him, he'll tear you apart like a rag doll." Hannibal's voice grew louder, drawing him ever closer on the trail of Will's faint scent. "But if you do make a good job of it," Will warned, his voice falling to a dangerous growl, "then I will be the one taking you apart. I promise." The man flushed with consternation and uttered a sharp little yip of laughter, more an escape of nervous energy than anything. "Come with me." "I will not," Will said, placid in the face of potential harm, knowing there was no danger this unstable person might offer that could weigh against the scale of his father's violence. When the man made as if to grab his arm, Will didn't think twice. He calmly plucked up the plank next to him and swung it with every ounce of his not inconsiderable strength, smashing it upside the young man's head. He fell backwards with a howl, his hand on his bleeding face, nearly thrown off his feet by the force of Will's swing. His broken spectacles crunched underfoot as he stumbled, reeling. "And let that be a lesson to you," Will warned him, moving closer and brandishing the broken board just to hammer home his point. "What vile, shameful behavior, sir! How dare you threaten my husband or me?" The man somehow kept his balance and turned to lunge toward Will, who was fully prepared to hit him again. Much to their mutual surprise, the dog appeared between them, snarling its little heart out, every hair on its brindled body standing stiff in agitation. Glaring, the man staggered back and fumbled his way into the nearest passage between buildings, nearly falling over his own feet in his haste to escape the barking dog, the threatening Omega, and the furious Alpha who was hurtling toward him, shouting, "Mason! Damn you!" "Mason!" Will echoed, shocked. He turned to give chase, but stopped in his tracks when Hannibal shouted, "No, Will, stop, for the love of all the gods!" His better sense took heed of the sheer horrified terror in Hannibal's voice, and he stopped in his tracks, waiting for his furious husband to reach him, the dog barking madly down the alleyway after Mason's fleeing form. Hannibal arrived in a flurry, scooping Will up into his arms with such force that he lifted him clear off of his feet, gasping with harsh relief. "Gods, are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine, Hannibal," Will said, dropping the plank to hug him back, the adrenaline from the moment fading to leave him shaken. "I'm fine. See?" Hannibal eased him down to his feet, hands flying over Will's body to ensure he was whole, every muscle in his body singing with tension. "Gods," he said, over and over, tears standing in his amber eyes. "Gods, you terrified me, Will. I was sure he would hurt you. Gods, if I had lost you." "Hannibal," Will said, stroking his cheek to calm him, though the terror in his bond was difficult to conquer. "I'm fine. I promise." Hannibal calmed under his touch, though he shuddered hard and held Will as if he might suddenly vanish, his fear slowly giving way to pure, unadulterated fury. "He must have been following us," Will said, his hands falling to Hannibal's shoulders, still soothing the tension from him. "He wanted me to come with him. I'm not sure of the reason why." "Mason Verger is impulsive and violent. Those are the only reason he needs," Hannibal said, his arms tightening reflexively in response to the threat Mason posed. He searched Will's face again, anxious and worried. "You are certain he did not hurt you?" "Never got a chance. I nearly brained him with a board." Hannibal stared at him, speechless in his incredulity. "He threatened to shoot you," Will said, in his own defense, and the moment he did so he wished he hadn't mentioned it. Panic filled Hannibal's eyes, accompanied by him snarling. "He had a weapon on you?" "Not for long. It was in his pocket. He didn't have time to draw it before I knocked him one." Hannibal's pulse tickled his throat, the despairing upset in his eyes not ebbing in the least. "I couldn't allow him to agitate me, as you have reserved that right for yourself." It took Hannibal a long, considering silence to admit to himself that Will had taken the only course of action available to him, given what he'd run headlong into, and that shouting about it now that the danger had passed wasn't likely to do more than earn him his little mate's keen ire. "You broke a plank across his face," he managed at last, letting the issue of the pistol go for now, though his whole soul shuddered with trepidation when he thought of it. A small lopsided smile curved his fine lips, and he said, a bit breathlessly, "What else would I expect of my mate? You are truly dangerous, Will." Well done." He kissed Will's forehead, then his mouth, hugging him close while saying again, "Well done."
"I didn't do it alone," Will said, blushing at even such a small kiss out in public, though no one was anywhere around. He gestured at the dog, who stood watching them with wary hope, the ragged flag of his curled tail beginning to wag when Will looked down at him. "I had a little help." Hannibal too looked down at the dog, his nose wrinkling at the state it was in, but he said all the same,
"There's a good dog."
The dog whined, a soft and pleading noise, accompanying more energetic wagging from its bushy tail.
"Well, he's a brave little fellow,"
Hannibal said, still keeping a watchful eye in the direction Mason had gone, though they both knew well enough he would not try his luck a second time for now. He dropped another kiss on Will's forehead.
"As are you, though I could paddle your backside for running off like that, Will. Honestly."
"I know. It was impulsive to take after him. I was worried he'd been hurt by the horse."
"He seems hale enough to me,"
Hannibal said, too relieved to have his mate back unharmed to hold his impulsive actions against him.
"But he will need a wash."
"A wash?"
"Yes, preferably as soon as possible,"
Hannibal said, bending to take hold of the rope that dangled from the dog's neck.
"Though it will have to wait until we leave the city. We need to go, and quickly. I expect your little chap will enjoy himself where we're headed, much more so than the capital."
Will looked from him and back to the dog, then back to Hannibal. Before he could formulate a response, Hannibal said,
"We need to get back to the coach this minute and be on our way. I'll send one of the footmen to Mr. Buddish immediately and get someone on Mason's trail. Mr. Tear should be here any time, and there is no better hunter."
He tugged Will back the way they'd come, the dog heeding the lead without problem despite the packed street. The coach was waiting at the edge of the street sail, the footmen on anxious alert. Hannibal dispatched one of them to Mr. Buddish with news of Mason's attack, and the other helped Will into the coach, hesitating over the dog until Hannibal pointedly looked at him and said,
"Yes, get on with it."
The dog was summarily hefted into the coach, where he curled up in the corner, alert but still wagging his tail. Will leaned down over him to check the rope around his neck, relieved to find it was not a slip knot and hadn't bitten into skin. It would do now to keep him from fleeing until a proper collar could be acquired. "That's a good boy," Will praised, pushing over when Hannibal climbed in next to him. The coachman whistled, and the horses began to pull, the coach swaying into motion to carry them back to Marsham Heath.
"Well, we've done all we can do for now,"
Hannibal said, settling against Will with a sigh and taking his hand to clasp it tight. He kissed his knuckles and rested their joined hands on his thigh before saying,
"Mr. Buddish will engage the constabulary and notify grandfather, and Mr. Tear will be put directly onto the hunt, which should please him."
"Then all's well that ends well," Will said, rubbing his thumb over Hannibal's hand.
"Yes, well, I still owe you a paddling for running so heedlessly into danger. But at least you rooted Mason out, gave him a smack for his trouble. This way, at least, we know for certainty he is in the capital."
"What of the missus?"
"Safe where they are,"
Hannibal said, stretching his legs out to get comfortable.
"Mr. Buddish will convey the findings through a third party to them, as well as to the garrison. They will not be taken unawares."
Will relaxed, letting the jostling of the coach wedge him close to his husband. The dog gazed up at them, his amber eyes the same light hue as Hannibal's, amusingly enough.
"And what are you smirking at?"
Hannibal inquired, noting it. "I can't believe you want to keep the dog."
"Considering you risked your life chasing after it, I hardly have a choice. What on earth will you call him? Something gallant, I hope. He's managed to help rescue you after all."
"I think," Will said, both of them turning their gazes to the dog in question, "we should call him Winston."
"Winston. A fine name indeed."
Winston's ears perked up in response, and he yipped just once, as if in happy agreement with his master's choice. The return trip to Marsham Heath passed in the blink of an eye, and without incident until midway through Moseley, when the dog began to fidget and whine with increasing urgency. "I believe Winston needs a moment," Will said, and Hannibal thumped on the roof, anxious that their furry little hero not mess inside the coach. The coach came to a gradual halt when it could, resting at the curb near Moseley Park. The footman and the door opened before either of them could stir for it, and they emerged onto the sidewalk, where Will kept Winston firmly in hand with the length of rope.
"He is a rather handsome fellow,"
Hannibal said, lifting his chin to taste the clean air,
a refreshing change from the smoke and stench of the city. Oh, he needs a proper collar and lead. I'll see what's at Marsham, Will said, laughing softly as Winston snuffled and promptly lifted a leg against the coach wheel, much to Hannibal's consternation. I'm sure one of your esteemed lector ancestors was a dog person. Lord Clarges. The booming voice actually made Will jump somewhat, sudden and loud as it was. Winston flattened to the ground, tail tucked, and scooted behind Will's legs, even as Will stepped closer to Hannibal's side. Hannibal shifted as he did, slipping an arm around Will's waist and drawing him into the warmth of his side, all of it accomplished in less than a split second, instinct and necessity responding to Will's spike of shock. Will saw the source of that shout coming toward them, accompanied by a woman and 3 uniformed officers. He was a mountain of a man, with his elegant lady on his arm, both of them smiling their way. She slapped his broad shoulder with reproach and said, "Honestly, Jack, excuse him, Lord Clarges, the cannon fire has made him somewhat deaf." "I can hear well enough when you scold me, Bella," he said, drawing to a halt just a pace away. "It's good to see you've returned, my lords. Magistrate Crawford, Mrs. Crawford," Hannibal said, inclining his head to them both and relaxing, his ease translating to Will. "This is my spouse, Will. The other Lord Clarges, if you will." Bella's smile widened at that, and she looked Will over with kind, thoughtful, dark eyes. "We were on our way back up to Marsham," Will said, still unused to people looking at him with such attention, particularly beautiful women. "It is so agreeable after the chaos of the capital." Yes, it is," Jack remarked, nodding. He looked around at the little town he was mayor of, pride evident in his face. "And how do you find our little town of Moseley, Lord Clarges? Much changed, I imagine." "Considering I haven't been here since I was a boy, very much so," Hannibal said, smiling. "But only in the most pleasant of ways." "You come for tea sometime, without your husband," Jack said, leaning close to Will to whisper with a smile. "The stories I could tell." Will blinked unconsciously, pressing closer to Hannibal's side. Jack Crawford wore the strength of his charisma as armor, a mantle of force to be used like a battering ram. He was tall and broad and carried his bulk with confident dignity, a country general used to being in charge and expecting to be obeyed, garnering the great respect of those who knew him. It pushed against Will with the pressure and strength of an ocean wave, affecting him all the more thanks to Mason's attack. "Jack," Bella said, chuckling, "you're doing it again." "What?" Jack asked, straightening with a pleased, smug smile. "Bella tells me I can be overbearing." "An honest spouse is a gift from the gods," Will said, and Jack laughed, belly deep and hearty. Will smiled a little when Jack shook a finger his way and said, "Yes, indeed. I can say I have quite a gift in all respects." He turned to Hannibal then, who was grinning, and said, "Please say you'll join us for dinner one evening. At your invitation. And thank you for your assistance in keeping Will safe." "You needn't thank him, Lord Clarges," Bella said, and levelled a wry smirk at her husband. "He thrives on such things. Only lately, perhaps, there is a little too much excitement around here for my comfort." "On the matter of uncomfortable things," Hannibal said, recalling another issue he was not pleased to leave as it stood. "Have you any information on a man named Hobbs?" "Garrett Jacob Hobbs?" Bella asked, supplying the name with a soft frown. "He is a bit of an odd man." "I ran into him in the woods," Will said, leaning down to give Winston a reassuring rub behind his ears. "He was very angry and unstable. It was unsettling to see." "He has a wife at the edge of town on the East Lane. He's known to have somewhat bizarre reactions to Omegas, Lord Clarges," Jack said. "I hope he didn't upset you. Usually we never hear a peep out of him. Very quiet folk, the Hobbs family, always have been. Their daughter works up in Marsham, doesn't she, Bella?" "Yes, surprisingly enough," Bella said, her full mouth curving in a small smile. "They're so protective of her. I don't think anyone in Moseley even knew they had a child at first. No one had even seen the poor girl until she started at the schoolhouse. I was shocked to hear he allowed her to work." "She must have charmed him," Jack said, chuckling when Bella agreed. "She's a darling girl, lovely and pleasant." "She is a delightful child. I would never have guessed there was a relation, given the difference in the temperaments. But I suppose Mr. Hobbs was merely having difficulties. He said he was hunting. Perhaps he lost his prey." "I think the more reasonable course of action is to avoid him," Hannibal said, still bothered by it. I dislike the idea of him lurking about the house. Mr. Wells could always engage a gamekeeper, but I doubt it would do much good," Jack said, troubled. "Hobbs is gone on another of his hunting trips, but when he returns I'll have one of my men inform him to stay out of the woods near Marsham. Everyone else has better sense than to go near his Grace's private property."
"No, please don't trouble yourself on that count. Thank you for your assistance, Magistrate Crawford."
"No trouble at all. That's what I'm here for," Jack said, smiling with expansive goodwill that demanded an answering smile. "Oh, and, Lord Clarges, if I could have a moment of your time."
"I believe that is my cue to continue my walk," Bella said, directing a wry, fond smile at her husband. She reached out and laid her gloved hand on Will's arm, in a brief, gentle gesture, and said, "We will send an invitation very soon, Lord Clarges. It's been lovely meeting you both."
"The pleasure is all ours,"
Hannibal said, and when she moved her hand he swept it up to kiss it. Bella moved off across the street with one of the guards in tow. It seemed strange to Will that they would have men escorting them, even if Jack was the magistrate.
"You can take the coach up, Will," Hannibal offered, and his gaze dropped to Winston, who looked woefully repentant for relieving himself on the coach wheel. "If Winston is quite finished."
"I think I should like to walk instead," Will said, stretching tall, his spine popping in sympathy. "It's a lovely day and the air is so fresh here. Winston needs some exercise and I want to drop our gift by for Abigail." Hannibal frowned softly as Will fished the hat box out of the coach. He cast a worried glance up towards Marsham Heath, where Francis, presumably, had already arrived.
"After everything that's happened, I don't want you going anywhere alone. One of my men can escort him,"
Jack offered, reading Hannibal's unease and sharing it. He took the parcel from Will and handed it to the young officer next to him.
"Drop it, and I'll drop you. Does that suit you, Will?"
Hannibal asked, and when Will agreed, he said, despite his concern,
"And I will see you back at Marsham."
"Yes, I'll just drop this by to Miss Hobbs on my way and be up. No, don't scowl, Hannibal. I'll only take a moment, and Magistrate Crawford said Mr. Hobbs is off hunting. I expect he will be better behaved in the future, should we meet again."
"I do have very faith in your ability to handle yourself, Will. Please exercise caution,"
Hannibal asked, taking his free hand to kiss it.
"I should hate for Magistrate Crawford to arrest you for trouncing Mr. Hobbs in his own home."
Jack's brows rose in surprise, and Will told him, "My husband is prone to exaggeration, Magistrate Crawford. Have no fear for Mr. Hobbs. It was very good to meet you. Thank you again for your efforts on our behalf." Jack tipped his head in acknowledgement, his easy smile doing little to hide the tension that began to bubble through him. Will stepped away from them, his curiosity burning. He remembered Mrs. Crawford's comment about things being too exciting recently, and couldn't help but wonder if this issue was related. "Has something dire happened?" Will asked the guardsman, as they headed toward the outskirts of the town near Marsham, Winston testing the boundaries of his lead. The ducal coach rolled past on its way to Marsham, empty now of both her lords, the footman giving a cheeky salute to Will as he passed. The young officer accompanying him grew even more nervous, but only offered,
"It's best let his lordship say, my lord."
"That's ridiculously inconvenient," Will informed him, then sighed in resignation. "But I can hardly blame you for your caution. Would you happen to know which of these houses belongs to the Hobbs family?"
"Yes, my lord, I'll take you."
The Hobbs cottage sat apart from the lane in a small cluster of similar cottages, all neatly tended and handsome on their respective plots. Will recognized it on sight, simply due to what sat behind the cottage. Frames for skinning, an unusually large smokehouse that nearly rivaled the home for size. It billowed fragrant smoke into the air, but it had the taint of the same unwholesome scent that had made Will's stomach churn. Surprisingly, Winston whined and grew reluctant as they approached, as if that nauseating smell made him nervous. "Wait here, please," Will said, taking the package and indicating a place next to the door. "Would you mind holding him for me?" The officer took Winston's rope with a smile and crouched to pet him, happily diverted. Will knocked, the noise softened by the fine leather of his gloves on the worn wood, but within a very short time a rather slender woman with her hair in a straggling blonde bun answered the door, confusion and alarm filling her blue eyes when she beheld Will and a guardsman on her doorstep. "Mrs. Hobbs, forgive me for intruding on you without warning. I'm Lord Clarges," she said, a nervous smile curving her mouth. She smoothed her hair and then her skirts, her eyes darting to see if anyone else accompanied him. "Abigail has spoken of you. Please, come in."
"Thank you," Will said, stepping inside. The scent of pine and leather within had a tang of Mr. Hobbs's unwholesome scent. It permeated everything, cloying and inescapable. Will felt for a brief, frightening moment as if he was seeping into his skin, reaching for the blood in his veins to become part of him, a dark and foggy shadow coiling out from unlit corridors. The sensation was so disturbing that Will brushed at the arm to repel it, prompting Mrs. Hobbs to say, "Have you a chill, my lord? I'll build the fire up." "No, please don't trouble yourself," Will said, following her into the kitchen, which overflowed with drying herbs and flowers. The rich scent of yeast and baking bread chased the remnants of Hobbs's odour away, and calmed his unease. "I only wish to bring this gift in person, and spare your daughter the effort of carrying it down from Marsham." "You're very kind," Mrs. Hobbs said, snatching up a cloth to dust a chair off before offering it to him. "Beg your pardon, it's bread day. Does the scent bother you?" "No, not at all," he said, surprised that she would mention it. He realized then that Mrs. Hobbs was a beta woman, used to the scent sensitivities of an alpha mate. Hoping to allay her worries, he said, "I enjoy the scent of baking bread, Mrs. Hobbs. It reminds me of when I was a child. Our family cook was very kind to me." "Please call me Louise," she insisted, hastening to remove the ever-present kettle from the fire. Will settled the package on the table and waited in polite silence while she made tea for them both. "I do apologize, Lord Clarges," Louise Hobbs said, offering Will a nervous smile along with his cup of tea. "I'm sure this isn't the type of house you're used to." "You have a lovely home, Mrs. Hobbs," Will said, taking the tea with a grateful smile. "And please call me Will." "I couldn't do that," she said, flushing brightly. Her hands fisted in her apron, but she sat down at the small table in her sunny kitchen. It was a rough place, but very homey, comfortable, and loved. "How do you find our little town, my lord?" "Beautiful, and a welcome change from the capital," Will said, sipping his tea. He noticed that Mrs. Hobbs was fiddling with her cup, more nervous now than she had been upon his arrival. "Mrs. Hobbs, Louise, you seem very unsettled. Have I caught you at a bad time?" "No, please, never think it," Louise said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's only Abigail has spoken so highly of you. I wondered if you might be curious about her, and that's why you've come." It was, Will thought, a very odd way of stating it. "I have an interest in everyone associated with the Lecter family, Mrs. Hobbs. Would you mind telling me about her?" Will asked, turning the cup in his fingers, hoping to put her at ease. "How old is Abigail?" "She's 16, nearly 17, Louise said, her face softening in a smile as she thought of her daughter. "Stubborn and sweet, apple of her father's eye." Something lurked there. Will could feel it in the way she turned her head away, the way her smile faded at the edges, worn with untold grief. "Mrs. Hobbs," he softly said, his nagging certainty that something was amiss solidifying with every moment she would not look at him. "Has something happened between Abigail and her father?" She shook her head a little and laughed, an embarrassed soft sound. No, it's just that she's growing up, and unfortunately you can't shield children from gossip when they reach a certain age." "Mrs. Hobbs?" Will asked, reaching out to grasp her hand, a spontaneous gesture made to soothe the growing agitation he could feel from her. "What is it? What has happened?" I assumed you knew, my lord. I thought, well, that's why you've come." "I have come only to deliver a gift for a dedicated employee. I most certainly did not come to distress you." She seemed reluctant to believe him, or else in possession of facts he himself lacked. All the same, she dabbed at her eyes with her apron, and squeezed his hand in return. I suppose you'll know before long. Abigail wants to find her real parents." Will processed that, understanding at once why she was so upset. Raising a child who was her own in all but the carrying, now facing the loss of her to a mother who had never dried a tear, never shared laughter, never witnessed the first steps or heard first words. Mother, a title that could be stripped in an instant by an utter stranger based on nothing more than a child's curiosity about where she came from. "Mrs. Hobbs, I'm so sorry. You must be so frightened," Will said, feeling her tremble and holding her tighter for it, as if he could will his strength into her. She nodded, grappling for words for a moment, trying for a smile that was tremulous at best. "Garrett and I could never have children of our own. It was such a difficult realization for him. He's an alpha, you know.
It's such a tricky business. We make a rather strange couple, I suppose."
"Not at all. There are a great many alphas who marry betas, Mrs. Hobbs."
"I wasn't his first choice, I'll admit," she said, aiming for proud and winding up somewhere tinged in bitterness. "But no omega would bond with an alpha who can't give them children. I never cared about all that. All I wanted was him. And then came Abigail, and we were the happiest we've ever been."
"A family at last," Will murmured, "until Abigail realized how different from you both she was. Until old gossip fell on fresh ears."
"Yes. She's very smart, such a smart girl. Started asking questions. What was I to do? I couldn't lie to my only daughter. She just wants to see where she came from. It's only natural, isn't it?"
"When did she first ask about her birth mother?"
Summer, I think," Louise said, shrugging a little, concentration wrinkling her brow. "Early summer. She's been plotting ever since to find a way back to where she came from. One of these days she'll leave us."
"But you're her mother,"
Will said, squeezing her hand again.
"No one can ever take your place, Mrs. Hobbs. Abigail will always be your daughter, and you will always be her mother."
Thank you, my lord," she said, her smile less forced. "I certainly hope that's the case. Garrett's been beside himself. She's his pride and joy, you know.
She's the son he always wanted, and the daughter he treasures. He would be so lost without her."
Will nodded, patting her hand once more before drawing back. He wasn't sure what he'd gotten from her, whether it was important somehow or not, but it felt important. It felt like something that could make all the difference.
"Is Abigail working today? I'd hoped to speak with her, very briefly, of course."
"Abigail's helping her father. They've been out hunting. They should be returning soon. Would you like me to send word when they've come home?"
"No, that isn't necessary, but thank you,"
Will said, grateful for her offer.
"Just tell her that I hope she enjoys our gift with a glad heart."
"I certainly will. You're so generous, my lord, to remember our girl," Louise said, her anxiety rising again. "Can I get you anything else? A tart, perhaps, or some toast?"
"No, thank you, Mrs. Hobbs,"
Will said, smiling to allay her nerves.
"I think I've taken more than enough of your time. Forgive me for being so intrusive. I do not envy your situation, but I truly do hope things work out for the best with your family."
Will certainly never dreamed that his kind words might come back to haunt him so swiftly and with such ill intent.
"I realize this isn't really the best time, but I wanted to tell you before you heard. One of the village girls has gone missing,"
Jack said, walking with Hannibal back toward Marsham at a slow pace.
"Missing? Has she fled to Blackwall? The soldiers can be very tempting for a young girl with excitement on her mind,"
Hannibal said, mild alarm taking hold of him when he looked at Jack and saw the deep, profound concern written in his features.
"Is there something you're not telling me, Jack? We've had girls going missing every so often for almost a year now,"
Jack admitted, and held up a staying hand when Hannibal began to protest.
"I know I should have written to his grace, but I didn't wish to distress him. We are all very aware of how fragile his health is. If not grandfather, then surely you could have applied to me. Children are missing, Jack. This is no trifling thing. You needn't tell me, Lord Clarges,"
Jack said, the weight of his worries bowing the set of his shoulders.
"There have been 7 so far. 7! Jack! We thought at first it was merely a case of running away,"
Jack said, lacing his hands behind his back.
"Fancying a soldier, taking off a Blackwall, as you said, but too many similarities for it to be just that." "They resembled one another?"
Hannibal questioned, wishing that Will had come with him, bending his keen mind to the details that would surely lose their meaning in a retelling.
"Same height, same age, same hair color and eye color,"
Jack said, shaking his head.
"All 16, 17 years old. Good girls from good, hard-working families. Girls in the bloom of their youth,"
Hannibal said, shaking his head.
"Terrible shame. And you found nothing of them? Not a trace? For a time we all hoped that they might yet return, but the longer things wear on, the less probable they become. How long ago did the last girl vanish?" "Day after you arrived," Jack answered. "She went to fetch an order for her mother and never returned. No one recalls seeing her anywhere along the way. It's as if she simply vanished into thin air. They all seem to have vanished into thin air."
Hannibal cast a glance up ahead,
but he was unable to see Will from this distance, and caught no sight of him on the trail up to Marsham.
I will write to grandfather of this issue, Hannibal decided. I will apply to the capital for assistance. I would prefer to handle this ourselves, Jack said, his frown ferocious. But with this many children missing, we'll accept any help we can get.
They hit the main thoroughfare, where there was foot traffic enough that Jack was forced to make polite introductions, though word had spread that the Lords Clarges were installed at Marsham for a time.
News travels quickly,
Hannibal lamented, tipping a nod in answer to another greeting.
Old blood is big news, Lord Clarges. Always has been. Hopefully your troubles won't catch wind of your location. I'm afraid that's a moot point, as we had never hoped to be circumspect in our movements. But I am keeping him close. We are attempting to remain unpredictable. Who wouldn't in your place,
Jack asked, a twinkle in his dark brown eyes, and one brow quirking.
Have you a report for me regarding Mr. Dollaride?
No, Lord Clarges, I have not. Because I was informed this morning that 2 bodies fished out of the river yesterday were those of the men I tasked following him. Hannibal's gaze snapped up to his ugly distress settling in the pit of his stomach.
The throats were slashed, ear to ear,
Jack said, miming it under his jaw.
The detective labeled it a robbery. Is that what you believe?
Hannibal asked, somber and serious, and even more determined that Francis not be allowed access to Will.
I believe that your Mr. Dollaride is a dangerous man, Jack said, grim, and that I won't risk any more of my men where he's concerned. A certain amount of danger is expected, considering our profession, but I won't send them straight into certain death. Nor should you,
Hannibal said.
I'll see the funeral costs are covered. The families will appreciate that, Lord Clarges,
Jack said, the weight of his responsibilities resting on the slope of his broad shoulders.
Have a care with him. If he is the one who dispatched my men, then he is certainly not one to underestimate.
No, Hannibal said, disturbed and unhappy.
He certainly is not.